Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me to this very important session in partnership with GEM Schools at COP28 in Dubai. A session that carries the challenging title, Sustaining Educational Impact for a Future in Which We Can Flourish, and it talks about ripple effects. And as we will see in a little while, to me, ripple effects are about throwing pebbles in ponds. I wanted to headline the session in my language, and that language is the title, Whatever the Question, Education is Always the Answer. The quote, whatever the question, education is always the answer, was given to me as a present by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu during his birthday celebrations in Cape Town in October 2016. And he mentioned that quote to me in relation to a very difficult task that he had faced, which was the task of reconciliation in the post-apartheid regime for which he had been made responsible at the request of Nelson Mandela. And however difficult the task, his absolute conviction was that education is always the answer. And I think today we would do well to adopt that thought. Those thoughts and the subsequent actions mustn't just stay with us, they must go wider. So it must be our target to make a difference beyond our own immediate circle. But like throwing a pebble into a pond, we need ripples that keep going on and on and on so that the difference remains. So my name is Geir Graus, Professor Dr. Geir Graus, OBE. I'm a Global Education Advisor, and I would much prefer to have on my office door Jean-Jacques Rousseau meets Willy Wonka. I'm very happy to be with you and to share some thoughts around how we might go about sustaining change in the world of education and how we might recognize what gets in the way and what very practical things we all need to do. One of the things we all need to do is make sure that we align our principles, that in our schools and in all of our environments, we, in this case, choose the principle that's on the floor rather than the principle that's on the sign. To bring about change, we need to first of all recognize where we are at the present moment in time. I think the following little video clip really tells us that very, very well.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
This beautiful but so clear clip that shows us that we are in jars with lids on, and in order to affect change, we need to, at least in the first instance, lift the lid, but possibly even smash the jar over a period of time. Otherwise, we will be guilty of serving the definition of insanity, which essentially is to go on doing the same thing and expecting different results. Here and now at COP28 really is a place for us all to smash that jar after we've removed the lid and to stop serving the definition of insanity. The change we're talking about is a collective change. We mustn't wait for other people to do it for us, be they leaders or politicians. We must take charge. The outcome of what we learn, what we gather and what we plan has to be activism in the light of hope. Out of all the Sustainable Development Goals, I believe there are 3 that are more important than the others. The first one, to quote again Desmond Tutu, is quality education. The second one is to reduce inequality. And the third one is partnerships. Without those 3, I believe the other 14 cannot happen. And that's another thing about these 17 SDGs. We really mustn't see them as 17 boxes to be ticked. We mustn't see them as compartments, but we must see them as a whole. One cannot be achieved or cannot be achieved as well without the other. And that is where my 3, education, equity and partnership, are top of the list in order to enable the others. Jars must be smashed, remember? Boxes must be taken away. We cannot achieve that goal of sustaining for a better world if we function in isolation. We need to work together as neighbours, as neighbouring countries, as partners with private and public sector and indeed NGOs. This is for everybody. And in that sense, that quote of friendships are better than normal ships has probably never been more true. If we don't work in partnerships, we won't achieve what we set out to do. Yet within that partnership arrangement, it doesn't mean that one size fits all, that we are all another brick in the wall. We must within that recognize our and each other's context. We are all different and we are all at different stages of developments. That is what will make that jigsaw much more complex and complicated, but it is also a very good aspect. Because imagine if we were all the same, the world really would be quite a boring place. We need to welcome the differences and not fight them, because otherwise the partnership and our goals cannot be achieved. Within that, then, we must recognize that some of those differences are to do with rich and poor. And we must recognize that within that, we all bear a responsibility for all individuals. If children in disadvantaged contexts aren't offered the same opportunities and possibly even more than children in advantaged contexts, we will never create equity. And without equity, partnership will be more difficult. And without that, our goals cannot be achieved. The steps really are quite straightforward. The journey may be longer and more complex than we think, but it is always worth doing if we bear in mind that in the end, it is not about people like me, but it is about my children and their children. Many of our pathways and many of the achievements will be aided by technology for good. This is much more important than good technology, incidentally. Think back to the equity and equality piece. It is much more important that everybody has access to technology than that a few people enjoy all singing and dancing technology. The solution to achieve equity is how we use technology, not technology per se. Technology per se is just another bit, just another piece. Technology for good is what will get us there, what will take us on the path to sustainability for a flourishing future. And we must remember that the decisions that we make must be, however difficult that is, must be decisions that we all own. That in itself is very hard to achieve, and we need to make sure that everybody can play their part in that decision making, and that it is not just the prerogative of the few, of the rich, of the powerful, but that it is the most democratic exercise that we've probably ever known in history, because everybody has to play their part, has to understand why they play that part, and has to want to own it. And we must measure what we value as opposed to just value what we can measure. And sometimes our measurements must become uncomfortable. We have to be challenged. So, for example, you can teach climate change as a natural science in school. You can turn it into a GCSE. You can test what the children have acquired in terms of knowledge and give them a certificate. So what? The outcome of the education piece when it relates to climate and our planet has to be measured in activism that leads somewhere. And that may be uncomfortable for some. As I said fairly recently at a conference, the outcome of the education piece may well be 20 million Greta Thunbergs. And we must remember, small or large, young or old, in whatever shape or form, we all also have a role to play as role models. We can all lead by example. We can all be a hero or a shero to someone. And we must remember to tell our stories, of our struggles and of our successes, of our joys and of our achievements. It is our stories that will go into the folklore, that will change the culture towards sustainability. There is much to be done, and storytelling has to become a very important part of it, because we all like a story, and most importantly, we all like a happy ending, don't we? And what I wanted from today, if nothing else, I hope that you will all be able to put a little bit into your back pocket, and at a certain time pull it out of your back pocket and say, I remember that bit, I can do that. I know how important equity is. I've remembered Desmond Tutu's quote. I remember that I can be a hero or a shero too. And finally, we must remember that the future is not something that is done to us or for us. The future depends on what we all do today. It's up to us. And thank you for having me today. Next time, I hope to be with you in person. Bye-bye for now, and thank you.